So earlier today, I was researching different types of content, trying to get new ideas for set 12, and I actually happened to stumble upon this video called 6 Beginner Mistakes in Teamfight Tactics. And this video was uploaded August 6, 2019. That is 2 weeks away from being 5 years old. So I was curious, I was like, wow, I wonder if the tips in this video really hold up to today's standard, because TFT has changed a lot over the course of 5 years. So I really want to watch this with you guys. I've not seen this video before. Shout out to Dry Bear Gamers for creating the video, and let's just get started. Let's see what their take is.
Well, this is how you do it. In today's video, I want to go over 6 of the most common beginner mistakes.
Man, the game looks so
players
different
that are
too.
playing in bronze, silver, gold, platinum, etc., that make these kinds of mistakes that affect their game and ultimately.
I mean, I'm not missing shit though. I started set 6
too early or take too much damage. These things are not the most basic, so if you're looking for basic tips, I have other videos for that, but this is going to go into beginner mistakes and how to correct them. The first beginner mistake that I see all the time is going to be picking a team comp too soon or too early into the game.
Okay, before he elaborates, this is so different than nowadays. Nowadays, you kind of commit to your comp pretty early. You kind of commit, like, you're not committed, but you are pretty strongly leaning towards a specific line, like 80-90% of the time by like 2-1. So usually, like, you'll be like, oh, like, I'm playing this around this 4 cost because my opener is so good, or like I'm playing this reroll augment or this hero augment or this reroll line from like 2-1 because my opener is really good for it. So it's kind of interesting to see that the game has shifted a lot away from this idea of like not picking your end game too soon.
Problem is that players look at these final team comps, these 7, 8, or 9 size teams that work really well together. They have great synergies, and with the right items, they can dominate the game. But what they don't realize is the game is built all the way up until late game. You have early game comps, you have mid game comps, and you have late game comps.
No, we don't. We have late game comps, no early game comps, no mid game comps. Those don't exist. You have the way that people envision boards and talk about boards nowadays is level 6 boards, level 7 boards, level 8 boards, level 9 boards, etc. But we don't really talk about like an early game comp. That doesn't really happen. You just play whatever the game feeds you. You're not rolling in the early game usually. It's really economically and efficient to do so. So nowadays, you just play what's given to you in the early to mid game. Sometimes you roll like a slight bit just to like maintain your tempo, or maybe you have to go from a lose streak to a win streak and start winning out. But we don't have like, oh, stage 3, you should play this comp. Like, that doesn't exist.
And you also have transitional comps and units that are really good at getting you to that late game.
So, hold on. We don't have transitional comps either, but we have transitional units. So things like, for example, set of a really good one is Wukong. Wukong is a druid to set, basically like a threat. He's traitless. So he's a really good transition. I would call him a transitional unit just to help you get to the stage that you're looking for. But I wouldn't call, like, you don't have a board that you're like, oh, I'm going to transition into this board and then end on this board. That doesn't happen very often.
Stage. So if you're picking a comp in the beginning of the game, you're probably going to run into a situation where you can't complete it, you don't have enough money, or things just don't work out in your favor, or maybe you don't even have the items for that comp, because as we all know, compositions in teamfight tactics are built by items, not by units.
Wrong. No, he's right. They are built around their items, but your items kind of like lean you into a direction, and that's why you know what comp you're going to play. So for example, like if there's a really strong Ginsu's holder, I think in this set, in set 12, it's Callista. If you have like a Ginsu opener, it's pretty likely you're going to end up playing Callista on level 8. So it's not entirely wrong, but the idea is kind of wonky.
So here's a general rule of thumb to help you know when you should be picking a comp. I like to look for my final game comp by the time I hit around Wolves. Anything before Wolves is usually just a mid-game comp or a stopgap to see if you can make it through mid-game without losing too much HP. But around Wolves is when the time that people will start picking their compositions for late game.
No. That's not true anymore. We know what we're playing by like 2-1 most of the time. We have a very strong idea as to what we're playing by 2-1. At least at the pro level.
On the units they've been able to get to 2 and 3 star, the items they've been collecting throughout the game, and what makes sense based on what is available to them. So if you're picking your team comp before Krugs, or, you know, before you even get to the second carousel, you're likely going to lose the game because your whole momentum built up to late game is a constant reassessment of what you have and what you can make and what the best option for it is.
Okay, so I like that you use the word reassessment. You are excuse me, when you are playing TFT, you are constantly reassessing your position. That still is true, but it's more like, okay, at 2-1, you're like 90% leaning towards this one line, and then as the game progresses, you reassess and you're kind of asking yourself, like, is this still the correct line for me to be pursuing? That's kind of like the main line of thinking, at least in modern TFT.
Second beginner mistake that I see all the time is people re-rolling at the wrong time or re-rolling too often. Now, we will give this guidance that you want to play the way the lobby is playing. If all the 7 other players are playing aggressive and re-rolling, you also have to do the same.
Oh, dude, that is not true at all. Wait, what? I didn't know people play TFT like that. When I first started playing in set 6, this was never a thing. Like, if everybody's playing reroll, yes, it's true. The bag size does mean that if more people are playing reroll, especially if it's the same cost of unit, you will have an easier time finding your units. But usually if like 1 or 2 people are playing reroll, typically a healthy game of TFT looks like some are rerolling, some are playing standard. So I wonder if there's lobbies back in the day where like everybody was rolling. That's crazy to think about.
You cannot play econ when everyone else is re-rolling, and vice versa. If you're playing aggressive and re-rolling when everyone else is running economy, you're going to lose the game because those just don't match, right? If you're running economy, you're not collecting enough units, you're going to fall behind and lose too much HP and probably die before you even make it to late game. But here's a good rule of thumb for re-rolling. In general, you want to have a goal in mind. If you're re-rolling and you don't have a goal in your mind, you should not be re-rolling at all. This is specifically like, I have a Cho'Gath 1. I want to get Cho'Gath to 2 stars, and I'm at level 6 or 7 or higher, where I'm very likely to get 4 costs like Cho'Gath, and so I'm gonna be re-rolling using the economy I have, knowing I'm sacrificing my money so that I can get that Cho'Gath to 2 star.
I'm sorry, dude. The way this guy says Cho'Gath is so weird. Cho'Gath. But I mean, generally speaking, he is right. He used the terms rolling and re-rolling synonymously, but they're not actually the same thing. Re-rolling means you are re-rolling like a specific cost, or typically it's a low cost unit, like a 1, 2, or 3 cost. You don't really say you're re-rolling 4 costs. That's more of a meme. But I mean, obviously language changes as time progresses, but he has the right idea though. Regardless of whether you're rolling on 8 or you're re-rolling at like 6 or 7 or even at 5 or 4, you do need a goal in mind. Like when you're rolling, you go, okay, I am rolling because I'm looking for X, or I'm rolling because I'm looking for Y, right? So that part still holds up.
Great example of a goal you have in mind. If you're just blindly re-rolling, you're going to waste a lot of money. You're not going to have the income that you need to get to late game and pull the game out of your hat, and you'll get stuck.
That is true.
Generally, if you get to Raptors and you don't have your late game build, most players around Raptors will be going all in. And what this means is if you don't have your late game build close, or you don't even have an idea of what your late game build is going to be because it just hasn't come together yet, if you're passing Raptors, you probably want to go ahead and take the 40 or 50 gold that you have and just re-roll all that and roll down and see what you can pick up.
So that's interesting, actually. So nowadays, you should know you should basically have an idea as to what your late game board is by like 2-1. I say that kind of jokingly, but you really should have a direction by like 3-1. So that's like, he's saying after Raptors, which is crazy, that's 5-1. I'm talking like by Krugs, you should probably have a game plan already, because up until Krugs, you're kind of going, okay, like, am I win streaking or am I lose streaking? And then based off of that, you're kind of like leaning into something. But even before you start streaking, you kind of already know the direction you're going. So yeah, this definitely does not hold up. If you still don't know what you're playing by Raptors, especially at the highest level, you're dead. Like, I think, I don't even know if you make it to stage 5. Like, you don't even make it to Raptors if you don't know what you're doing the whole game. So that's funny to see.
Because a lot of times, if you're going past Raptors and getting to Dragon and you don't have a late game comp, you're in late game at this point, and you need to find a build or you're just going to get eliminated. The number 3 mistake that I see from beginners in this game a lot is building the wrong items or building items at the wrong time. Now, items, like I said earlier...
Okay, so far, that does hold up.
And I will always preach this. Items are what makes teamfight tactics builds work. If you're running gunslingers and you don't have gunslinger items, it's going to fail.
Yes,
if you're running shapeshifters and you don't have shapeshifter items, it's going to fail. If you're running sorcerers, you get the idea. You have to find the right items that work for the builds you're running. And oftentimes, if you know what you're doing, I would recommend seeing your items and building a composition off of that. If you're getting a lot of Giants belts,
that is very true. Based on your items, you should know what lines to play. That actually still holds true to this very day. So that's very cool to see.
You don't want to run hyper carries because you're not going to get the rage blades, the rapid fire cannons, the bloodthirsters, the things that make the hyper carries work. If you're going to run rangers, you want to have a lot of static shivs and shojins for the ash to make it work.
Lots of static
shivs. If you don't have those items, you're going to have to think of something else. And so building the wrong items, there's a couple items in the game that are generally just not good to pick. I would actually put Ionic Spark in that role right now. It can be good against certain comps, but it's starting to fall off a lot.
That's so funny. Spark is like one of the best items you can slam in the current game, especially if you're playing around AP. So hearing him say it's the worst is crazy. Maybe he doesn't do the same thing that it does now, but Spark is amazing. I want Spark in my game like every single time.
But there are some items that just aren't worth picking up. And there's also items that generally are based on a specific area of the game. Static Shiv is really good early on. If you get Ionic Spark really good early on, it can do a lot of damage.
He's cooking. That's true. That's true. Some items are better early than they are later. Shiv is a very good example. Sunfire Cape is a very good example. Maybe it wasn't in the game at this point. Spark in general is very good, and it's better in the early game as well, especially if you have a strong tank for the early game. Things like Morello are better in the late game. Gunblade's better in the late game. So this still holds true. So cool to see that that's been a philosophy that has been sticking around.
But late in the game, they don't do as much. The flip side of that is if you get Morellonomicon at the very beginning of the game, that won't have the same level of impact because Morellonomicon is great if you're using on people like Kennen, Garen, anyone that has a large AoE, Cho'Gath, Karthus, these kinds.
Cho'Gath.
And the team fight needs to last long enough for A, you to get your ultimate off, and B, for that Morellonomicon to actually take effect. And so if you're building Morellonomicon with 3 units or 4 units on the board, it's not going to have the same impact as another item. The number 4 mistake that I see a lot,
still holds up.
this is probably actually worth an entire video on its own, I'll put that on my list, but it's not playing what the game gives you. I want to tell
that is true. You should play what the game gives you. This is very, very true. But it's true in terms of items. It's not necessarily true with units. If you're, for example, if you are going back to the previous example, you have a Rage Blade start, you should probably be thinking about playing around multi-strikers, playing around Callista, right? But if the game gives you, like, for example, like a 2-star Gwen that you don't have items for, it's a very expensive investment that you're not going to be utilizing. So true for items, not true for units.
You right now that you need to get it out of your head that you are in control of what composition you build. It's not true, especially when you get to the high levels. You are building what the game is giving you.
No, not true. It's the opposite. You are very in control of the game, of the comps you play, because the comps that you are going to end with are the lines that you were leaning from the beginning because you knew your opener was good for it. And you could identify that your spot was good for it. So this is actually very untrue. I would say that this is a big noob bait. But of course, the video is 5 years old. But yeah, cool to see that that definitely does not hold up.
Items based on what drops and also what you're able to roll. If you want to run knights, but you're not being given any knights, you don't want to spend 60 gold re-rolling trying to find this knight build when either the knights are being taken by other players or you're just not finding them. You're just unlucky and the roll's not there.
So actually, that's kind of interesting. So he does make a good point. Like if the game isn't giving you, I keep using multi-strikers as an example, but like let's say you get the Ginsu opener, your spot is still very good for multi-strikers, but like you should be leaning heavy towards multi-strikers, but if the game gives you something else or an alternative out that can utilize that Ginsu's, then that's fine as well. It's not, I guess it's not entirely just based around your items, but it's heavily item dependent. But if somebody else, especially like you mentioned, is contesting your line, either you should have identified it that they were going to contest your line because their opener was also good for the line, or you just didn't do your due diligence and you didn't scout properly. So
a lot of times what will happen, and this happens to me if I feel like, you know, I'm hitting a point where I need to all in and I'm doing what I like to call rolling down, which is just rolling until you find something, is you roll and you find units that are valuable, units that are high value to your team, and you just keep buying them until you can find one that gets to 2-star or 3-star, and then you start coalescing a composition around that. What the game is giving you is what you should be building.
So I think nowadays it's a little different. You can't be super open-minded. You kind of have to be like, okay, this is what I'm searching for. This is what I'm digging for. But you should also keep a couple alternatives in mind just in case you don't find exactly what you're looking for. So, for example, a really good way of practicing this is that, let's say on 3-2, you have lost streaked all the way up until this point, and you need to spike your board. So let's say you have 80 carry items, right? Obviously, a 2-star 3 cost that can utilize these 80 carry items would be the best. But sometimes that isn't the case. So you might want to roll for like a 2-star 2 cost that might be able to utilize the items just as well, or sometimes even a lower tier unit that could utilize the items just as well. And you can kind of balance these because there's classes now. You have magic tanks, 80 fighters, 80 carries, right? So if they fit within the same class, those are sort of the alternatives that you can think about on your roll downs. But again, you should be digging with a golem mine and maybe like a sub golem mine in case you miss on plan A, right? Having a plan B is nice.
There are times where I start out
But you
with
can't
a
be too
really
open-minded.
great
Don't go to
no
plan D.
bulls
Like,
or gunslinger build, and then all of a sudden the game just gives me 6 Shyvanas out of nowhere. And so what I need to do after that is say, okay, cool, I just got close to a 3-star Shyvana. Let me see if I can run Shapeshifter Yordle or Wild Shapeshifter or something with the Shyvana and build items around that, because guess what? The game is giving me a lot of duplicates of this unit, and so I'm going to play off that. I'll see if I can make a video separate from this, because this is actually a whole other topic entirely, but it's very important that you're paying attention to what the game is giving you. The number 5...
Yeah. That is true, though. So, like, for example, you'll see sometimes some pro players will have some pretty interesting endgame boards where sometimes, and this is the most common example I can think of, is that they have just this random 3-cost 3-star just chilling on their board. That actually does hold a bit true, because if the game is giving you a lot of units, especially this is most true for tanks because tanks are the most flexible with their items, and you end up like slowly building up tank items anyways, you kind of prioritize the carry items now. But if the game is giving you a lot of copies of a unit and that unit can fit on your board, it might be just a slightly different variation, you should be holding on to them. So that is definitely something that is pretty true, I would say.
Mistake I see beginners make all the time is running units that bring low value. The units you put on your board, you want to have a high value output. This means that their ultimate gets off, or they live long enough to impact the team fight, or they fit into a synergy that you're trying to build. I see a lot of players run units that either aren't very good. Units like Elise right now is kind of crappy. Twisted Fate doesn't really do a whole lot.
Okay, I see what you're
These
saying.
units don't bring a lot to the board, and if you spend a lot of money investing in them or putting them in your team comp, you're just gonna be down, right? In a lot of cases.
Okay, so that's interesting. So nowadays, unit quality isn't really talked about enough, I think, at like the beginning parts of TFT. It's kind of a harder concept to grasp, but basically TFT tries to be balanced, but it's never perfectly balanced, right? And there are some units, this is more true in the early game, but there are some units in the early game that are just better than others. So for example, there will be a tank that is better than another tank, despite the fact that they are both 1 costs. So basically making sure that the unit quality is high. This is more for the early game. And the late game, your composition is kind of already decided at that point. You kind of do have a board that you already have. So maybe you can put in some units that are of good quality as sort of like substitutes. But at the end of the day, you really do want to end on the board that you kind of already have in mind, that you, again, probably committed to sometime very early, like stage 2 or stage 3.
If you run like a Twisted Fate versus a different unit that's not even in your synergy, it may be beneficial just to run that other unit. Like if I see a Twisted Fate or a Poppy and I'm running sorcerers, as long as I have 3 sorcerers, I might just run the Poppy because the Twisted Fate doesn't bring a whole lot to the team fight. And the last mistake of the 6 that I see a lot of players run into, and this is something that you'll learn over time as you get better at the game, but not constantly assessing your team's strengths and weaknesses. This requires a lot of experience, but this is something that I want you guys to be working on as you're playing the game. But think about what you need, right? Sure, you may have a composition in mind then you're 1 or 2 units off of, but watch every time your team fights another team and see what you surmise from it. It might be.
I like that advice a lot, actually. I think that's really, really good. When you play TFT, I think this is something that's really obvious to when you actually like just stop to think about it. But when you start playing the game, you kind of just forget it along the way. But sometimes when you're watching a fight, you might go, wow, do I have enough frontline? Do I have enough damage, right? And just asking yourself these simple questions and trying to determine just the core problem of your team comp currently can really help you make the correct decisions when it comes to rebuilding or restructuring your board. So for example, sometimes a very clear example is like, let's say you you had a fight go on and you have a really strong 2-star 2-cost carry in the back line with like 2 items during like stage 3. Really good. But your front line's all 1-stars, right? And 1 costs. You might be watching that fight and then you're still losing despite having such a strong carry. And you should be able to look at that and go, okay, you know what? My front line is lacking, so I should get more tanks and get a tankier, beefier front line, so my stage 3 is a lot better. And that is sort of one of those opportunities where you can actually roll a little bit, specifically during stage 3, to try and fortify your front line and try to cruise through that way. And again, you gotta be economically more efficient nowadays, but that still holds true to these days. You can still roll on stage 3 just a tiny bit, just to make sure that you're good for
holy
the rest
crap,
of the
I have a
stage
lot of
and the rest of the
damage,
game, really.
but I don't have any front line that's up there defending it. And
Yes!
so my damage dealing characters are just dying too fast.
He's cooking! He's cooking! He's cooking! He's right! He's so right! Yes!
Or they're being exposed and they can't be trapped. So you want to see if you can get some frontline in there. Even if it means that you just grab a tanky unit like a Braum or a Leona or a Cho'Gath or something. Even if it doesn't fit your composition, it's still fitting the need of I need frontline right now. Conversely,
yes! Dude, this guy was ahead of his time a little bit. Like, yeah, I mean, it's a very fundamental thing to think about, but when you play TFT nowadays, especially if you're starting like recently, like you kind of just look at the comps and go, okay, that's fine. Like that's what I need, but you don't really understand why you need it. And so being able to assess that is really, really nice. So dude, this guy's cooking. This is a very good tip. I'm very surprised that this is, I'm not surprised. It's a fundamental thing, but like the fact that it still holds up so well even to now is pretty good.
You have a very like 4 knights, 2 guardians, you have this really tanky team, and it takes a while for you to lose, but you still lose every time. You might be missing damage, and so you want to see if you can add damage into your composition, even if it doesn't fit your sim. Throwing in an extra assassin, or finding a Draven, or putting a Rengar in there, even if it doesn't fit what you're going for, might be enough to get you over the edge and prevent you from losing HP until your full composition comes online. And that's it for these 6 beginner mistakes that I see all the time watching streams and talking to players and playing on multiple accounts. These, if you're able to master these and really work these into your play, will make a huge difference in your
not all of them, but a decent handful nowadays. Yeah, not a bad video at all. Not bad.
ability to climb the rank charts and get better at team fight tactics. And I really appreciate you guys being here and stopping by. Please, if you made it this far, check out my Instagram, follow me on Twitter,
Instagram,
you know, subscribe, comment, all the yada yada yadas.
Who the fuck uses
Check me
Instagram
out on
anymore?
Twitch as well. I stream about 4 or 5 days a week now, and I will see you in the next one.
Well done. Good video. Well done. All right. Well, that's, dude, honestly, not a bad video at all. I actually like that. It was pretty overall pretty good, and I'm surprised like a decent amount still hold up. Yeah, that's solid.